Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we have our final four sets in the NBA playoffs. So we take a look at those four teams, what the Bucks can possibly learn from them. A very interesting comparison between the Bucks and one team that was just eliminated, and some news from Marc Stein that suggests another Bucks reunion may be in the works. We get into all of that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To Locked On Bucks, I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can hear Camille on the Technical Foul podcast, on the Pack a Day podcast, and soon enough on the Carry the G in MKE podcast. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or watch every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by PrizePicks. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, Locked On NBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. Camille, I mentioned it last in our intro there, but I suppose the place to start is from Marc Stein in his Substack. I think this broke Friday or Thursday night, that Doc Rivers, we talked about some of the changes to the coaching staff last week. He is apparently not done and has his eyes on Sam Cassell. So a potential return to Milwaukee for Sam IM.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It makes sense, just given the fact that, when Sam Cassell started his coaching career, I believe it was in Washington, and then after that, he joined Doc Rivers with the Clippers and then followed him to the 76ers as well. So he has a long working relationship with Doc Rivers, in addition to the fact that Doc Rivers was also his coach, I believe, on that Celtics team when they won a championship. So they go way back at this point, and Sam Cassell is just somebody who it seems as if Doc Rivers really values, who he trusts. And it seems as if Sam Cassell doesn't get that Lakers head coaching job, a reunion here in Milwaukee with Doc Rivers, a reunion with the city of Milwaukee, where he did play for a few years, as you mentioned, could be in the works. And based on what we've heard about Sam Cassell and just what he's done on various coaching staffs, it sounds like it would be a positive if the Bucks can find a way to get him here on the coaching staff.
5 years as an assistant coach with the Wizards, as you noted. I believe that started the year after his playing career ended. And then he spent 5 years with Doc in Los Angeles on the Clippers bench. He was in Philadelphia for all 3 years that Doc Rivers was the head coach of the 76ers before going to Boston last year. So he's interested in that. The Bucks are apparently interested in him, according to Marc Stein. And some of the reasons we'll get to in a second here, but I suppose the things we do need to point out are Sam Cassell may be, at this point, with some of the coaches that we've seen move on, he may be the most sought after, I don't even want to say assistant, but coach that's out there, because so let's start with his current team, the Celtics. Charles Lee has accepted the job as the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. The assumption is Sam Cassell is going to be elevated to that, associate head coach, whatever the designated title that Charles Lee was, the number one assistant in Boston, if he stays there. So you have that front. You have the rumblings that Doc Rivers really wants to add him to the Bucs staff. And then also in that piece of reporting by Marc Stein is the fact that Sam Cassell is also in consideration for the Los Angeles Lakers head coaching job. So it seems as though Doc's thing is, hey, if you take the Lakers job, great, good for you. If not, I want you to come here to Milwaukee and really help bolster this staff of ours, as Doc has kind of apparently mentioned, looking to get more of that experience on the sidelines and build up this coaching staff. And a guy that's, again, a very legitimate candidate. We've talked last year for a lot of the first half of the year about the Bucks staff. And it's no knock on any of those assistants, but it was just such a transformation through the years, not just with the head coaching change. When you think about the guys that had left, Darvin Ham, Taylor Jenkins, the two biggest names. Charles Lee leaves in the head coaching change, but it was a very, very strong staff that Mike Budenholzer had at the start. And that's what happens with success is you get picked apart. We saw that towards the end. That wasn't the staff that we saw here. You thought it may have some fingerprints of that when we thought it was going to be Joe Prunty and Terry Stotts leading things on that bench. But then it just became a lot of inexperienced, at least at that level, I suppose. They're very experienced coaches, but it wasn't the same as what we'd seen. So you get the sense with Doc, it's all right, we need strong staffs here. And I feel pretty good in Dave Yeager and Rex Kalamian, who was it? Pete Fernandez, I believe, the other one that he added shortly after the All-Star break, and now another guy that he's very familiar with. And again, the fact that he's in consideration for the Lakers job and was sought out by the Boston Celtics as well, Sam Cassell, another very strong option there.
A super strong option. And the thing with the Lakers job, and it's when it comes to head coaching gigs, there's only so many. There's only 30, in the league to choose from. So you're going to want to try to get those when they open up. I mentioned it when Darvin Ham went to the Lakers, and again with Sam Cassell, like for a first-time head coach, that's walking into a job with big expectations, maybe not a lot of room to learn and to grow into becoming a head coach. Like the assistant years are definitely great, but you walk into LA on a pressure seat, just given what that team is looking to accomplish on their particular timeline with LeBron James there. So it's definitely a high pressure job. It's a job that many will be seeking because, again, there's only a handful of coaching jobs as it is. And the Lakers is a big market, but that's definitely a tough market to coach. But one thing that Sam Cassell has about him that would also be useful here in Milwaukee if he was to come and join Doc's staff is that he's also apparently really good with stars. He's very good with players, managing personalities and so on and so forth, which seems like it'd also be a good fit here in Milwaukee. That's something that we mentioned with Doc Rivers about like, hey, I get that he wasn't the original coaching selection here for the Bucks, but what he's known for, it should be good for this particular team because, as you mentioned often, Justin, the Bucks are a super team. So you do have to figure out to manage those personalities in the locker room. Now, I'm not saying that as if the Bucks have a bunch of like guys who are just super egotistical and they're trying to be all about themselves, but there are some alphas in that locker room. So you do have to make sure roles are clear. Everybody understands. And Sam Cassell seems like he's also somebody who's really good with that personality chemistry aspect of a locker room, which cannot be undervalued.
Yeah, his connection to stars is something that Stein and others, for that matter, have pointed out as well. And, the interesting comparison that Marc Stein makes to is to Darvin Ham, the coach that Sam Cassell could theoretically be replacing with his connection to stars and players in general. And not to say that Doc Rivers doesn't have that, but there was just something there with Darvin that drew people to him. Sam Cassell is very much a similar personality there. But the other thing that Stein points out is, the other comparison to Darvin Ham, and I suppose we experienced this last offseason as well with Adrian Griffin, is this belief that Sam Cassell is overdue for a head coaching role that's out there. And look, sometimes that works. Sometimes you just weren't meant to be the guy, right? Sometimes you need assistant managers. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes that's where you fit in. So that's the interesting part. And if you wonder too, well, I haven't heard Sam Cassell's name come up with his Lakers search. I heard JJ Redick. I heard Bud for a brief second and a handful of other names. How did Sam Cassell all of a sudden jump into the mix here? Don't overthink it. He is represented by Clutch Sports, who, of course, also represent LeBron and Anthony Davis. So that's a big piece there as well. I would assume you kind of get the sense with the way that Marc Stein phrased all of his reporting that if he does not get the Lakers job, I feel pretty confident Sam Cassell is going to be a member of the Bucks staff next year.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, just given the relationship between Doc Rivers and Sam Cassell. Now, we are recording this live on YouTube, and I did see a comment with any thoughts on Darvin Ham coming back. I'm not sure how likely it is for Darvin Ham to come back to Milwaukee after losing that Lakers
Yeah.
head coaching job. Normally, when you get to that head coaching rank, you want to try to stay there. But if you do take an assistant role, I would think it
You
might be
don't do
more
it
likely for him to
immediate.
join Bud than it
Right.
would be to come back to Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think if Darvin Ham takes an assistant job immediately, it's going to be in Phoenix with the
Same.
Suns and Mike Budenholzer again. I wouldn't be surprised if he just took the year off and waited to see will he get offers next year. But the timing of Bud taking that job with the Suns is certainly interesting. We got some thoughts on Bud and his introduction in Phoenix as well, and just what it means. And Mike Budenholzer is back on the sidelines next season. But Sam Cassell, leave your thoughts in the comments here. Another reunion possibly in the works. And hey, the last time the Bucks had a player from the 90s / early 2000s on their coaching staff, it resulted in a championship. So maybe Vin Baker is still there, but that's a 90s thing before that era. But still, you got a title with Darvin Ham there and those upcoming Bucks. So maybe you can get the same once more if Sam Cassell joins this team. So leave your thoughts in the comments and let us know your thoughts on the potential addition of Sam Cassell. I mentioned Mike Budenholzer introduced in Phoenix over the weekend as well. We got some brief thoughts on that. And the games that were played yesterday, one interesting theory that has been out there. And again, it's a conversation we're going to have many times this offseason. But what does all of this mean for the Bucks? So Camille and I will start to dive into all of that coming up after the break here on Locked on Bucks. Well, time to talk to you about Yahoo Finance, because it would be great if we could all see our investment and retirement accounts in one place. Well, with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation. Maybe it's to pay off your debt or your mortgage. Pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom. And with Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to reach that financial freedom. When it comes to financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that is Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind the great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth. It includes 401k and other investments. Comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it is how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. And things are just starting to heat up now in the playoffs, and you can get in on that playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a whole new level. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey playoffs going on. Baseball as well. PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Getting in on PrizePicks is easy. Just download the app and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 on PrizePicks. And look, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN, all day and you have to constantly turn down the volume because of all the shouting that you hear, it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel, and it is programmed entirely for you. It brings you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today has can't-miss analysis, opinions, news. It streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. A Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, speaking of that front, I don't know if, look, I think one spot where Bucks fans can empathize with Pacers fans is, did you catch the broadcast yesterday of Game 7 between the Pacers and the Knicks, and the coverage, I should say, of that basically Knicks network that ESPN was trotting out there? You had Stephen A. Smith featured in the walk-ins to the arena as if he is playing in this game. The disaster of the pregame and halftime panels that ESPN has put together. And then the end of the game where if I were to tell you the most unbiased person on the broadcast was Mike Breen, the voice of the Knicks, as the final 3 minutes or so were basically patting the Knicks on top of the head and saying, hey, moral victory, you'll be back next season. No mention at all of the Indiana Pacers.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't. Honestly, though, the thing that disappointed me the most was just how much Stephen A. Smith we got leading up, and he's on Knicks, and then they lose, and there's no Stephen A. Smith. Like, at least if you're going to give us the entertainment, let's see the man after his team lost as well. Let's get that on air. But no, the Pacers definitely did not get too much shine about that. It really was a lot of conversation about the Knicks, and I get it, because the Knicks were a team that really battled every single game in, game out. We know they had the injury misfortunes with going into the playoffs without Julius Randle, and then they lose Mitchell Robinson, and then you see OG pull the hamstring, and then you see Brunson dealing with stuff, and then he fractures his hand in this game. Like, it was so many different things that were happening where I get it. And as somebody who was hoping that the Pacers would meet their demise in this series against the Knicks, I felt like the Pacers did deserve some credit for that, because coming out on the road, Game 7, and playing the way that they did, where they got a lead, took the Knicks' best punches, and kept pushing that lead back up. It was an impressive showing from the Pacers, especially after you saw Game 7 with the Wolves and the Nuggets, where you see the back and forth and the comeback efforts and how difficult it is for a road team to get that Game 7 victory. So, yeah, I definitely peeped that as well with how ESPN was talking about the Knicks in comparison to the Pacers.
Well, you got to tune into First Take today to get Stephen A's reaction to it. Look, I don't want to turn this too much into the let's rail on ESPN and complain about coverage. It's bad, right? And that's, I think, the discouraging thing about it. Sounds like Turner losing rights to the NBA. The hope is, hey, maybe take that whole group and put them on NBC if that's who gets it. Also, maybe Amazon, who's going to have a portion in there as well. But man, let's hope these two new entities that we have, assuming that it is NBC, are pretty good, because it's just not a good experience that you get through the ESPN broadcast, start to finish. The pregame, the halftime, which doesn't even exist. It's all of 2 minutes, basically, that you get in analysis there, and everything else. So speaking of that game, the Indiana Pacers, here we are in the conference finals. So you're going to see a lot of comparisons tossed around to, hey, this is the Atlanta Hawks all over again in 2021. Maybe so. This, to me, I can't remember another year like this recently, where, you've already started to see some, even national people, push back and say, hey, have we really poured over this path that the Boston Celtics are going to have, presumably, to the NBA Finals? And for the Indiana Pacers, look, credit to that team. As we said during that series, they closed out the Bucks. It's hard to do for a young team that's never done it before against a team that has a lot of experience. They did it. So credit to the Pacers. And same story here, where they did that, coming back, winning Game 6 the way that they did, and then winning Game 7 in Madison Square Garden. Doesn't matter who wasn't there or who wasn't 100%. But that's kind of the stink that's going to be attached to the Pacers of, well, you beat the Bucks without Giannis and with Dame missing 2 games and Chris Middleton hobbled for a couple of those games. You beat the Knicks without Julius Randle. without OG Anunoby for most of that series, with Jalen Brunson banged up. And now they get the Boston Celtics, which if I was a Celtics fan right now, I would be terrified of maybe Kristaps Porzingis doesn't come back, and who else is going to go out in this series?
I mean, listen, on top of that, you have like the weird random like Bucks beating you in the playoff streak going in the favor
Streak's
for the
alive
Pacers.
now. What, 5 year? 5? Is it 4
Yeah.
or 5 that we're seeing?
Like 19 Toronto, Bucks lose to Toronto. Toronto reaches the finals. They win.
Miami.
2020, we lost to Miami in the bubble. They go to the finals. They lost. We got the ring in
Boston.
21, 22. Bucks lose to Boston. Boston goes to the finals. They lost. 2023, we lose to Miami in the first round. Miami gets to the finals and they lose. And this year, the Bucks lost to the Pacers. We will see how far they actually go this year. But outside of that, the irony and it seems like it's what's the movie where the guy dates the girl and then she meets her husband right afterwards or something like that?
Good luck, Chuck. Yeah, that's the Bucks and the Brewers and the Packers. I mean, it's a Wisconsin thing.
It feels like it. It feels like it. But listen, I can acknowledge the fact that injuries have played a part because it normally does every single year in the playoffs. That's just what happens. But I'm not ever going to take away from fans celebrating the fact their team moved on. Yeah. I felt the same way in 21 when the Bucks beat the Nets, where it's like, I understand Harden got hurt. I understand Kyrie got hurt. KD was out there giving everything that he had, but you can only play who's in front of you. So I'll never take away from that. I acknowledge that, injuries play a part, but you still have to be good enough to win. And the Knicks team, as banged up as they were, that still went 7. In the Boston Celtics, they're going to be without Kristaps Porzingis for at least the first couple of games in the series here, as he deals with a calf injury as well. So we will see how that goes, but I'm not sure about you, but I still think Boston comes out of that series over the Pacers.
Yeah, I would assume Boston comes out of it, and I don't even know. I was going to say, I wonder if Boston feels like, man, everything has been gift wrapped for us when you see the Denver Nuggets go out in the West semis, but that's not to take away from what Minnesota did, because that series and the Bucks Nets series are far and away the two best series I think that we have seen in the playoffs, really since the Warriors run in that dynasty, where you had the Warriors and Rockets going at it, the Warriors and Thunder, the Warriors and Cavs in the finals. Those two series were incredible, and I think I would even edge the Nuggets Timberwolves series in front of the Bucks Nets series, just because you basically had everybody. I mean, Mike Conley missed 2 games in that series, but it was at full strength. It was two-way play across the board, and it was an incredible series to take in. So again, it's similar to what we kind of talked about last year, and I want to save some of this for our next show when we take a look at the change that we've seen come into the NBA. But the last thing to touch on is just, what you mentioned about, look, I'm not gonna take away from fan bases feeling excited for their team advancing. And that, I think, is one of the things that a lot of us took away from the Bucks winning the championship in 2021 was how that felt. And especially for a team, an organization like the Bucks that came from where they were, when we talk about those Sam Cassell teams immediately after that and before it, you could not have envisioned the Bucks even being in the conversation to win the championship. Minnesota Timberwolves are a similar story. The Denver Nuggets last year were a similar story, even though it happened before the Bucks. The Toronto Raptors, a similar story when it was year after year. LeBron James, LOL, beats the Raptors again. So we are starting to see more of that. And that's always kind of been my stance is, look, if the Bucks can't win the title, I want it to be somebody that deserve is probably the wrong word, but one of those long-suffering fan bases, not the Celtics, not the Lakers, one of those types of teams. And when you look at these final 4 teams, there's only one team left in that mix that does not fit that bill.
Looking at Boston, I would assume they're saying they don't necessarily fit the bill. Yeah, because, you have the Pacers in the East, who they're going up against. You have the Wolves and the Mavs in the West. First off, I just want to say that should be a really, really fun series. Given the proximity between Minneapolis and Milwaukee, might have to, hit up Game Time, see what those tickets are looking like. Might have to try to slide over there and see a game. But for the Bucks to not be in it, the Western Conference Finals are going to be exciting. I'm not sure if they'll be able to surpass what we just saw with Wolves Nuggets. That was a series that just was a roller coaster. But the star talent in it, and hearing Anthony Edwards right after they won saying like, "Oh, I got Kyrie. Don't worry about that." Like, I'm very much looking forward to that series kicking off on Wednesday, and then you have the Eastern Conference Finals starting on Tuesday. So there's still some good basketball to watch.
And also telling Charles Barkley it's time to come to Minnesota. It's time to get here. It's and look, the last point now for real is another year where we don't get Nikola Jokic versus Luka in the playoffs. So that's kind of the West version of Giannis versus Joel Embiid. We finally got it laid, but the NFL version was Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady in the playoffs. So another one of those what ifs, or will we ever see this? We mentioned Mike Budenholzer, so I do want to wrap up the show with some thoughts on Bud and some takeaways from what we heard from Bud at his introductory press conference. And I would imagine there's going to be Suns fans in the Midwest here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, maybe 80 times a year now this upcoming season. So we'll get into those thoughts and wrap things up after this on Locked On Bucks. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right. Over the weekend, Camille, Mike Budenholzer was introduced as the head coach of the Phoenix Suns. And I saw some of the press conference and certainly a lot of clips of it. But look, you couldn't help but feel good for Bud, who I think if you follow him on Instagram, was living his best life this past year, doing a lot of travel, golfing, spending time with his family. And now at this press conference, look, when the Suns job opened up and Bud was still out there after being linked to teams like the Nets, the Lakers, I theorized too, maybe he's a fit for the Cavs. If they make a coaching change, that's another one of those coaching changes to keep an eye on. When the Suns job opened up, it seemed like, yeah, this is a no-brainer for Bud. And that's what happened. And so Bud at this press conference said it was mind-boggling to him, mind-blowing to think that he is the head coach of the Phoenix Suns, obviously having those deep, deep ties to Arizona and right around the Phoenix region. But I thought one of the more neat parts of it was he had about 15 members of his family and friends that were there at the press conference because he is an Arizona native. And one of those was his 94-year-old father, who Bud said is the original coach Bud. So to be able to do that and that type of homecoming, I think by and large, Bud is always going to be beloved, I hope, by Bucks fans. But it's things like this where you feel even better to say, hey, good for him that he gets to go home, coach. He gets to tie in his family to this as well. And it's going to be a very interesting roster that he inherits. But I think even better so the fact that he's not in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, that is always what I look for. Like, at least don't be in the same conference. Let me cheer for you, from a distance, where your success doesn't necessarily affect what's going on in the East. Like, if we made it in the finals, that's a different thing. Which, how ironic would that be if we did get a Suns Bucks finals with Mike Budenholzer coaching the Suns rather than coaching the Bucks? But yeah, I'm really happy for him being able to coach, a hometown team, somewhere where you have your ties already set. Strong family ties is really cool. And I love that in his introductory presser, he mentioned the fact, we need a point guard. And we got to learn how to play without one, but we also need a point guard. And that's the piece when looking at the Suns last year where I get what they were thinking about, saying, hey, we don't necessarily need one. We can just have Devin Booker bring it up, or we can have whoever bring it up. But you saw, especially in the playoffs, as things started going, like how much a point guard was needed to kind of get people into spots, get people together, and also just some depth on that team. So the build out of that roster under Bud is going to be really interesting, just given where Phoenix is when it comes to their salary cap and everything like that. But having three stars with Devin Booker, with Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant, I mean, that's a pretty good start to go from. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Bud does with this team, how the style of play might change, especially given the fact that Bud is a defensive guy. And your three stars are KD, D-Book, and Bradley Beal, not necessarily guys known.
Two-way guys.
Right. Not necessarily known for that defense. So it'll be interesting to see, but like you said, I'm happy for Bud getting another opportunity, especially in a market that he's familiar with and that he has family ties.
So a couple of other things to point out. You mentioned the whole point guard discussion. Bud did not hide from that and said, we need to look at the whole roster and talk about point guard. It's a hot button issue, whether it's with the media, the players, the front office, but we're definitely thinking about it. We need to be able to play without one. We need to be able to have one. So we have to be versatile and play in different ways. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there and what players could be on the move. Because, as we kind of talked about as the season ended, I think of all the teams that are done early. When you look at now, you can throw in the Denver Nuggets, the reigning champion Denver Nuggets. 6 straight years now that we're going to have a different champion. So again, that's one of the discussions I want to get into on tomorrow's show. But when you think about the teams that are done early, I think this year the Bucks are the team that is least likely to make any type of big moves and knee-jerk reactions, because they're probably looking at it as, we went through our change last year. We brought in Dame. We made a coaching change. We made another coaching change. Now we need continuity. We need to settle into place. We need to make some changes on the edges, but we're not in that boat of, all right, we got to examine everything and blow everything up here. I don't know if Phoenix is not, but the challenge with the Suns is, how do you do that, right? I don't foresee them trading Kevin Durant. It's going to be interesting to see the partnership between KD and Bud, given all of the narratives out there about Kevin Durant and his relationship with coaches. Devin Booker, he's not the guy that you move on from immediately, given his age and the makeup of that roster. And Bradley Beal's basically impossible to move on from. So how do the Suns bring in a point guard? Is it just a veteran minimum guy? And again, defense is going to be something that Bud looks to there. So they're going to be one of the more interesting teams to monitor through the offseason here. But the last piece on Bud was, and again, what I think makes it even more special as a Bucks fan that's rooting for Mike Budenholzer, is when we talked about the members of his family that were there at the introductory press conference. He talked about spending this past year, as I kind of mentioned, living it up, right? He got to do whatever he wanted and take some time off, paid very handsomely to do so. But a lot of that was family time and going to his son's games and being able to spend time with them. His son is a senior in high school and they're in the Phoenix area. So that doesn't change for him. He said, I would coach this team if it was on the moon. But I mean, this was just the cherry on top of the sundae, that it's the team he grew up rooting for, the state he was born and raised in. His family is still there, and now he's the head coach of the Phoenix Suns. So congratulations to Mike Budenholzer, somebody who I think will get a very, very warm reception when the Phoenix Suns come to Milwaukee next season.
I hope so. Bucks fans, please let Mike Budenholzer feel some love when he comes back. I love that he did get to spend this last year off with family, because, I mean, during his last coaching stint here in that series against the Miami Heat, we did learn that he lost his brother during that series. And listen, losing somebody, especially very close to you, it's always a long grief period. It's a lot to go with. So being able to ground yourself with family, take a year off, spend that time together is of the utmost importance, surrounding yourself with love, and then being able to get back into a profession that you love in a market that you already live in, a place where you grew up in Arizona, where you can continue to see your family and you don't have to reroute anybody and everybody is still there. So I love it for Mike Budenholzer. I wish him the best in Phoenix for sure. And if I am at a Phoenix Suns game when they come to Milwaukee, I will definitely be making sure I'm giving that man some love, because will always have love in my heart for Bud, bringing a championship here to Milwaukee. Love for Bud for helping to unlock the next level of Giannis's game, and also just kind of making the Bucks, helping to establish the Milwaukee Bucks as a perennial contender as well.
And I will go as far as saying this. I'm assuming when the Suns are in Milwaukee next season, it will be the most gregarious version of Mike Budenholzer you have ever seen, the most personal version of him that's been out there. And it's going to be very emotional for him there as well. And that's, the other thing is, you mentioned the loss of his brother. That's what makes doing this in Phoenix and having your family around you even more special for Bud. So again, congrats to Bud. Best of luck to Bud 80 times a year, and should have come down to the finals. Not then as well. We got a lot coming up this week on the show. I mentioned what we didn't get to today, saving for later in the week, and that is a look at what we've seen the league start to transform into here. The Bucks probably not in the knee-jerk reaction, we got to make some type of move, but we've started to see a very interesting story develop with the league for the last decade now. So we'll get into that and how the Bucks compare to some of these teams that were bounced earlier than they would have hoped for. A lot to come from that discussion. We're also going to be joined by Ty of the Eurostep podcast on the show and get some more of his thoughts on last year, but more importantly, the young guys that he had a chance to see and cover throughout the year with the Wisconsin Herd, and where development could come from next season. Also, as we put our poll question up there, if you have not voted yet, it is on the Locked On Bucks YouTube page, so cast your vote now. The first 4 options, we're doing a Flashback Friday series every single Friday this offseason. We are going to record an episode that looks back on a player, a team, an event, whatever it is, and we put our first 4 options for you to vote on for this Friday show. And right now, the leader in the clubhouse is the hiring of Mike Budenholzer here in Milwaukee. So very timely there as well. But be sure to cast your vote. We're going to close those polls, I believe, Wednesday. And then Friday, you will get your first Flashback episode. And we'll post the poll for next week's show shortly after that as well. So still a lot coming up here, even though there is not Bucks basketball going on. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.